All right, so day number 2 of a movie every single day. The movie I watched today was very different from the movie yesterday. A dark comedy, so it's good to change things up, and I'm looking to do that every single day, just to change up the genre, and get a wide variety of films. And I think comedies, the comedy genre has evolved somewhat since really the 90s, early 2000s. In the early 2000s, we had a lot of those, raunchy comedies or just really silly comedies that came out. It was a huge phase that happened in the early 2000s. And there were some great movies that came out of that. Some movies, right around when Superbad came out, Pineapple Express, like all these movies that fit in that genre were pretty funny, pretty good, and I enjoyed them a lot. I know a lot of people did as well. But it's evolved since then a little bit with, involving other elements into the comedy genre. It could be a satire, dark comedy. It could be even a little bit clever. And I think that's a great thing. And I think that we don't see too many of those movies anymore. And, this movie has some of those elements in that. And, I think a comedy obviously is supposed to make you laugh, but if it can tell a story and be a little clever as well, I think the comedy really shines more than, one of those stupid comedies that I mentioned or those early 2000s comedies. So the comedy genre is a tough one, right? Because making someone laugh, can be really hard, especially if it's not your forte. You're not a comedian. I think it can be extremely difficult. One of the movies that comes to mind is Nice Guys. If you've seen Nice Guys, you know what I'm talking about. It's a blend of multiple genres. It's an entertaining story, but also there's just so many moments in that movie that are really funny. And, I don't think it's set out to be a comedy, but it ended up being, I even consider it a comedy now, because a lot of the movie is very funny. And I think that, a comedy can be that. A comedy doesn't just have to be something so simple and stupid. It can be, much more than that. It can be a complex story. There can be, multiple genres involved, a thriller. A comedy can really have anything in it. And maybe that makes it better on the writer, right? Like maybe it makes it easier to not set out thinking, I'm just going to write and make a movie just for laughs. And instead they have in mind they want to have some comedic elements, but they instead are writing, a drama or a crime thriller, and they throw in comedy in there as well. And I think another important element for comedies is they need to have great acting, right? Like a comedy doesn't work if you don't have a great performance or a great actor. And because really that's what's going to sell it, right? Like if you can make the lines believable in a comedy and the character believable, I think that the audience is going to laugh, they're going to connect with the character, and it's really going to succeed. So it really relies on, obviously writing, like I said in yesterday's video, is extremely important. Arguably the most important thing, but for a comedy, it is so much about the acting. And if you have a great cast and a good idea, you can pull off, pretty much any sort of comedy. Like think about The Office, right? Like Steve Carell, the writing was good, but he's such a good actor and he pulled that off so well. So it all just, everyone that watched that show and that enjoyed it all really connected with his character and found all the scenarios, all the other characters interacting with him, like all of that worked really well. And it ended up being a great comedy, one of the greatest comedic TV shows of all time. So acting is the most important thing in a comedy. So this movie is largely about a movie. It's largely a movie about movie making, and I think that it's become more popular, right? We had Once Upon a Time in Hollywood that had that element of movie making in it, which was great, and really maybe a larger commentary, right, on movie making in Hollywood in itself. But it's a difficult sort of style of movie to make because you're trying to tell a story to the audience, a general story, and then if you're trying to basically break that wall of the general story and include another element of movie making in itself in the movie about the movie, I think it's extremely ambitious, and not many people pull that off. Off the top of my head, I think of, like I said, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, an adaptation with Nicolas Cage, and there's a few movies that have succeeded in doing that, being a movie about movie making, but this is another one that I think does succeed. Maybe not as well in my mind as those movies, but it is, a movie about movie making is one of the toughest things to write. I've tried to write something about, I've tried to think of ideas like that and write things being that sort of style, a movie about movie making. And in some ways, I think that it's been oversaturated. It's not a new idea, right? The audience knows this already, a large part of them probably. So, it's not really a new idea. So you'd really have to do something unique in your approach. Otherwise, I don't know if it would work as well, and maybe it would grow old, but maybe that's just me, maybe it is somewhat new to people and maybe it would work, but I think that people should avoid doing this, at least for a while, right? Unless they can think of a really clever way of making the movie, making the movie about movie making and, using the elements of screenplay and satire and all of that, and they do that in a very different approach, then maybe it would work. But, movies about movie making, they need to stop for a while. All right, so let's start unpacking this film. The Seven Psychopaths, directed by Martin McDonagh, starring Colin Farrell, Woody Harrelson, Sam Rockwell, Christopher Walken, and a few more, but those are the ones to mention in this cast. Some stars in this cast, some stars in this movie, and there's a few that really shine in this movie that I think do, the best job. Obviously, you have to mention Colin Farrell. This is their third movie together now, I believe. Martin McDonagh and Colin Farrell, they did In Bruges, right? And they also did the Banshees of Inisherin. I might have just completely butchered that. But they've done 3 films now. And of all the 3 films that they've done together, this is my second favorite, with In Bruges being third favorite, and then the Banshees being first. I wasn't a huge fan of In Bruges, but I'll save that for another day, another review. But this one had a lot of positives, so let's dive into this movie, right? It's obviously a dark comedy, a satire. It's almost 2 hours long, so a little lengthy for a comedy, but it works. And you'll be entertained throughout the entire movie from start to finish. As I said before, it's a movie about movie making, and so it does seem, kind of confusing through the first half of the movie. You're sort of wondering what's going on, but I think as the movie progresses, you really start to understand the general story better, and so I think really outside of certain elements in this movie, they could have done the writing and the pacing better, but it's not the worst I've ever seen, and it's bearable. You will be entertained, like I said, and also you can follow it. It's not one of those movies that you just can't follow and don't understand. Everything is pretty much explained in this movie. You just have to be patient and bear with it, and I would say it's worth it too. So it's a dark comedy. It involves crime, comedic elements, obviously, and, I guess a little bit of romance, but really it's like a camaraderie between a few characters, Sam Rockwell, Colin Farrell. These characters are really the highlights of the movie. It does have sort of that sort of, stupid, second half where you have the villain, right? You have like the archetypical villain in a comedy movie, and it has some of that. But it doesn't really focus on that very much, which I did appreciate. If it was more about that, I think this movie would have had a worse rating for me. But it doesn't focus too much on that. Really, in the second half of the movie is when you start to see that focused on more. But nothing will stand out like a lot of comedies, right? They're not going to win any awards for cinematography, and I think it's a fine shot film. But like I said, nothing really stands out in a comedy as far as cinematography goes. I'm sure there are some out there that I haven't seen yet, and if you have seen some that have just incredible cinematography or an incredible soundtrack or score, please comment that down below, and I will check them out. But typically, from my experience, those aren't the highlights. It's more of the writing and the acting. This is a movie about a screenwriter trying to write a movie called The Seven Psychopaths. And really, he's trying to write this movie the entire film and struggling with writer's block. And it's an interesting situation, which often makes it for a good film, especially a comedy. If you can put the stories or the characters in an interesting predicament or a situation, usually that's a great way to write the movie, and this is what it is. It reminded me a lot of Pulp Fiction, right, where you have characters who seem to have different storylines, but they all end up linking up together and connecting somehow. And you'll see this in this movie with the Seven Psychopaths. And as I mentioned before, there's sort of like a pacing issue in the movie for me. I think that the entire story is told in this movie, but really the first half for me was better than the second half. I think the first half, it was so much more mystery to me in the first half. And then in the second half of the movie, you can pretty much tell how it's going to end and what's going to happen. So there's not any mystery in the second half, and it's pretty simple in the second half of the movie. But the first half is somewhat complex with a lot of things happening at once. And so you're sort of, left trying to figure it all out. And I think that, just because it's that way, the pacing is a little off, but every single backstory of the character that they have, they told it in the style, showing basically, the history and the backstory of each character in a sequence. And every single one of those in this movie, honestly, was the highlight for me. I think they did those extremely well. You really connected with the character, and it didn't even take long, right? It was just a few moments, a few minutes on the screen with their sequence describing their backstory, and you understood the character, you understood their story, and you connected with them. So that was a big strong point for me. And there was a certain sequence in this movie right before the final third happened, basically with the character of Billy envisioning his ending for the movie, and that whole sequence was just hilarious. It was definitely the funniest part of the movie. It was great. Like, they just did that so well with him narrating and them just, playing out how he thinks that this movie should end, and everything is done so well in that sequence. So the sequences really shine for me in this movie, but outside of those, the story, like I said, just drags, especially in the second half. But yeah, I don't think this was like a home run movie. They didn't nail it. It could have been better in a lot of ways. I think that because it's almost 2 hours, really that ending could have somehow be cut down some. the ending for me just felt so different from the rest of the movie as far as the pacing goes. I think, like I was saying, a lot of the movie is told with these sequences interjected throughout the movie, and then like the ending, right, didn't have too many. But one of the the sequences were the highlight, but the other highlight was the Vietnamese character that wasn't included in Marty's Colin Farrell's screenplay. I think he was an interesting character, and I'm glad that they picked up where they left off with him, because they introduced him in the beginning of the film, and it seemed like they were just not going to come back to that, right? He like didn't want to focus on that guy, but they ended up coming back to it towards the end of the movie, and I think that, I don't know, he just had like an interesting story that was just so different from everyone else, and you just have to watch it, and I think it was pretty interesting. But this movie does some things very well, and I admire the ambition the filmmaker takes. Taking on a movie about movie making is always tough, and there's a lot of this story that he does well, and the acting here by those main four actors that I mentioned is great, and it'll keep you immersed into the story. So I do admire just how he takes on this sort of project, and we do get a movie out of this, and we do get to see this, and I think that comedy should push into sort of these types of movies. I mean, this is over a decade ago, right, since this came out, and so we need to see more of that. Personally, not a huge fan of like a lot of just dumb comedies that come out, and I can't even think of any recently, because maybe not a whole lot have come out recently, but I just think over the years there's been a lot that have hit the theaters that have led a lot to desire and weren't funny. And I think that if we can push sort of in this route, it can be dark comedy, dark comedy, satire, works really well. It's very popular over in Britain, and I think it's very popular. It can be more popular here in the United States, and so I'm hoping that these guys push out more things like this, because we need more movies like this. I mentioned The Nice Guy is one of my favorite comedies ever. I call it a comedy because it's funny, and we need more comedies like this, and the comedy genre really needs to evolve. And I just don't know when I've seen a comedy that was good in the last few years in theaters. I think the last one I can literally think of that had maybe some funny moments was like Bad Grandpa. That was just so long ago and not even that great of a movie. The last thing that I will mention is, this is now the third film that I've seen with Colin Farrell. It's kind of funny, like I don't know how it all happened. This was a recommendation from my friend who, told me that I should check this out, and he recommended another movie with Colin Farrell that I mentioned, in Bruges, and it's the third one that I've seen in just the span of 3 or 4 months. But I think he's a great actor. I don't know how, I think in the Banshee movie we see a little more diversity, right, with him and his acting, and more variety. But, he seems to play somewhat of a similar role in the movies that I've seen in those 3 movies. But he does a great job. Every movie that I've seen, you're going to be invested in his character, and in this one too, right? You're going to be invested into the alcoholic writer. I admire Martin for making this movie, and I would rate this movie as a good watch. Definitely check it out as far as seeing the comedy genre taking in a different way, an ambitious film in a lot of ways. I would rate this movie a 7.2 out of 10. I think, like I said before, there's just some pacing issues, and I think it's just hard to make a movie like this and make it higher than like 7.5. It would just have to be absolutely knocked out of the park. But a 7.2 is good for a comedy, and that's what I would rate it, 7.2 out of 10. So comment down below other comedies that I should check out, some different comedies that aren't the normal stupid slapstick comedies. I want to see how this genre can evolve and be different. And if you want to check out my full written review on Letterboxd, that is in the link down below. So, dudes, check out 7 Psychopaths. Remember, it's just art, dude, and I will see you all tomorrow.